You are listening to KSG Podcast. This is a short, crisp, concise, exam oriented, edited editorial for civil services aspirants. In this podcast, we are going to talk about the biodiversity commitment. Source for the content is Amitabh Sinha's article for the Indian Express. A major international environmental conference has just concluded in Montreal, Canada, promising to take urgent action to protect and restore the world's biodiversity, all the different forms of life, plants, as well as animals that inhabit this planet. This conference was the biodiversity equivalent of the more high profile climate meetings that are held every year. Signatories to the Convention on Biological Diversity, that is CBD, in 1993 agreement meet every 2 years, not annually like the climate meetings, to work on a global plan to halt biodiversity loss and restore natural ecosystems. The Montreal meeting was the 15th edition of this conference, hence the name COP15, or the 15th Conference of the Parties to the CBD. The Montreal Conference has delivered a new agreement called the Global Biodiversity Framework, that is GBF, which contains 4 goals and 23 targets that need to be achieved by 2030. The GBF is being compared to the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change that is guiding global climate action. Now let's talk about the Biodiversity Convention. The comparison of the biodiversity meetings with the climate conferences is not incidental. The two are in fact closely related. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is UNFCCC, and the CBD were both outcomes of the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, as was the third member of the family, the Convention to Combat Desertification, that is CCD, which deals specifically with the issue of land degradation. The CBD came into force in 1993, the other two in the following year. The three environmental conventions seek to address the issues that overlap among them. Climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss, while changes in land and ocean use have an impact on climate change. Land degradation appears as a cause as well as effect in both climate change and biodiversity loss. So while all the three agreements hold their separate COPs, their interlinkages, not very obvious in the 1990s, are getting increasingly evident. The success on any one helps the cause of others too. The CBD is not just about conservation and restoration of ecosystems, it is also about sustainable use of natural resources and equitable sharing of benefits from the use of these resources. For example, if a European pharmaceutical company wants to make use of some medicinal properties of plants grown in Tamil Nadu, the benefits of such use, monetary or otherwise, must be equitably shared among all stakeholders, including the indigenous populations that are custodians of that specific biological resource. Talking about Cartagena and Nagoya, the CBD has given rise to two supplementary agreements, the Cartagena Protocol of 2003 and the Nagoya Protocol of 2014. Both agreements take their names from the places where they were negotiated. The Cartagena Protocol on biosafety seeks to protect biodiversity from genetically modified organisms by ensuring their safe handling, transport, and use. Genetically modified crops, for example, can interfere with natural ecosystems in ways that might not yet be fully understood. That is the reason why GM crops are cultivated on segregated farms. The Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing deals with the commercial utilization of biological and genetic resources, for example, by pharma companies. It asks the host countries to provide access to its genetic resources in a legal, fair, and non arbitrary manner, and as mentioned above, offers them a fair and equitable share of benefits arising out of utilization of those resources. Now, more than the GBF that countries agreed to in Montreal earlier this week, it is these two protocols that are comparable to the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, talking about the 30 by 30 target, the meeting in Montreal that concluded on the 19th of December 2022 was the second part of COP15, the first part having been held in Kunming in China last year. Kunming was supposed to hold the entire COP15, but due to COVID-19 restrictions, it could only organize a hybrid event, part online, part in-person meetings in October last year. A full meeting was scheduled for April this year, but the COVID situation in China was still not conducive. Finally, the conference had to be shifted to Montreal, the home of CBD, even though it was held under the presidency of China. The headline grabbing part of the 4 goals and 23 targets in the Global Biodiversity Framework is what is commonly referred to as the 30 by 30 target, a commitment to protect at least 30% of the world's lands, oceans, and coastal areas by 2030. A related commitment is to ensure that restoration activities would be started on at least 30% of degraded land or marine ecosystems by 2030. The overall goal is to ensure that all natural ecosystems are maintained, enhanced, or restored substantially, with an overall increase in the area of natural ecosystems by 2050. Another goal is to ensure a tenfold reduction in extinction rate of species, currently estimated to be tens to hundreds of times higher than the average of the last 10 million years. A recent report said that about 1 million species face extinction, some within a few decades, if urgent action is not taken. Among the other 2030 targets is a commitment to reduce global food wastage by half, reduce the risk of pesticides and other chemicals by half, and cut at least 500 billion US dollars every year from subsidies that harm biodiversity. The 23 targets for 2030, including the 30 by 30 target, are milestones towards the overall goals for 2050. Now, talking about evaluation of the deal. Though important, this is not the first time that countries at CBD have listed out specific targets for protecting biodiversity. In fact, the latest exercise is just a replacement of similar targets that were meant to be achieved in the 2020 to 2020 decade. In 2010, at COP10 in Nagoya, Japan, countries had agreed to a strategic plan for biodiversity containing 20 targets. These used to be called the Aichi targets. Aichi is the region in which Nagoya city is located. A recent report showed that none of these targets were achieved at the end of the decade. The GBF is to the 2020 to 2030 decade what the Aichi targets were for the previous one. The challenge will be in their implementation. That's it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To join KSJ in the courses and to crack the IELTS exam, visit ksjnet.com. You can also get a PDF of this podcast on ksjnet.com. Thanks for listening and do subscribe to our channel.